political support of the ANC. It is why the ANC lost the election last year. And by my numbers, had we political support of the ANC, it is why the ANC lost the election last year. And by my numbers, had...
Well. And the prodigal son returns. The state of the nation hasn't seen this chap for a year. And here he is, fresh from halfway through his master's that he's doing in California in the USA. And that is a partner at France Cronje Private Clients, Bheki Mahlobo. Bheki, welcome back to South Africa.
Mike, it's great to be here in the country again. It's great to be on your show again.
Yeah,
it's too long.
It has been.
I'm glad to be here.
It's been about a year. We obviously had you on the show regularly around the elections and quite soon thereafter. And then, most disappointingly for me, you jetted off to go and get a little smarter, as if you weren't smart enough. Doing a master's in the US in California. Masters of what?
Masters in economics. I've always wanted to position myself as an economist when I started my career about 8 years ago. I had the fortunate opportunity and environment where I had really good people that were training me, but the main aim was always to become an economist. I felt that the best way to do that was to go overseas. Of course, South Africa has really good universities, Stellenbosch being an example.
Yeah.
But I really wanted to see, how do I stand amongst Americans that side?
Yes. It reminds me of the old story of how Trevor Manuel became Minister of Finance. And they asked, is anybody, because the ANC was very low on economists, and they asked if anybody was an economist. And he put up his hand. He thought they had asked if anybody was a communist. But hey, he became Minister of Finance. What can we say? This is South Africa. But you've now been in the US for a year. You're halfway through your master's, another year to go. And, we thought that we'd get you on here so that you can give us an insight as to, the US, South Africa, relationships between the two countries. But firstly, I want to kick off with the question, in South Africa, there's this kind of idea, and it shows in our foreign policy, that America's about to collapse and be overtaken in the world as the global leading economy, and it's hemorrhaging and it's got all these problems. You've been there for a year. Is America about to fall apart?
Short answer, no. When I landed there, I got there in August of 2024, just a few weeks before the November elections there. And the first thing that I found quite remarkable is the quantum of capital investment that I saw in the United States. There's big roads, there's big trucks. They like everything big. Even their cup sizes are 1 liter. They're large. And what I also find quite remarkable is that I think it was on the second day that I got there, there was this restaurant opening up named by the Popeyes, and I saw a hiring sign that was there, and I saw many young people studying in universities having jobs. I saw a lot of people spend times with families, spend time in restaurants over the weekend. I saw a very strong economy and people spending, and people as well having jobs. It's an economy that has an unemployment rate of about 4.2% compared to South Africa's 32.9%. So it's a completely different world that I was there. So to answer your question, no, it's a thriving economy, and it's largely due to the fact that they don't tax capital investment in the United States, although there was a direction towards that. What I saw was a thriving economy, particularly in California. If we were to take California and to be in its own country, it would be the 5th biggest economy in the world. And it's largely because you have these very educated kids from universities, study in Ivy League universities, go to the private sector, and they become very successful at very young ages, at 19, they're about in their early 20s. And they managed to start very successful careers. The businesses, though, particularly in California, depending which industry you look at, manufacturing, for example, is not doing too well. They moved to Texas, where they have lower taxes. In fact, Texas doesn't have any state taxes, compared to the very high taxes that when I was speaking to businesses, they were facing that side, and was a concern for them, for board members, as well as that of other families and the like. So I saw a thriving economy even within that. Even with what you read, for example, of the perception of the United States, what I saw was quite a remarkable thing. It was a 180-degree world than the one that I knew. I come from rural parts of South Africa in the Eastern Cape. And when I went to Johannesburg for my education, about 90% of the people that I grew up with still don't have a job to this day. And then when I go that side, everyone has a job and they tell me that's a normal thing. And it is a normal thing. I think it is a very good thing that I saw there. And it's definitely something that South Africa should be achieving till this day.
Yeah. And it's so, it kind of reinforces the message that South Africa, as we sit here in 2025, is choosing to be poor.
Yes. Yes.
There's nothing structurally wrong with the country. It's nothing wrong with the people. It's the state and the mindset of South Africans where we are choosing to be poor.
On that point as well, so I'm based in California and I've traveled to Washington, D.C., and I've spoken to officials, particularly we're talking now with what's happening this week with the U.S. tariffs. I've spoken with key people that have their eyes on South Africa, and their perspective on South Africa is that the negotiations, particularly from South African officials, has been lethargic. When I was there was no ambassador, South African ambassador in Washington. There was no official from the government side speaking to Americans, and that's largely due to the point that they've made there that we're choosing to be poor.
Yeah.
In that there's great economic opportunity that South Africa could capitalize on. And the US has been crystal clear on what its concerns have been towards South Africa. And what they've put it to me is that South Africa's empowerment policies, it's fine for a country to have its own laws. We are a sovereign nation. We should have our own laws and how we govern. However, what the South African government should understand is that those policies have consequences. And from American perspective is that South Africa's policies have actually been a tariff by multinational corporations that want to set up shop here and invest here. They taxed immediately before they come into the country, immediately before they evaluate what square mile they want to buy in South Africa for their head offices and the like, and they choose not to invest in the country. That's the first point that was put to me. The second point that was put to me was on the question of expropriation or compensation, the Expropriation Act. And the way it has been drawn up is that it allows for the expropriation of fixed and immovable assets below market value. That's a deep concern for many companies. And this is not only the opinion of Americans. I've also spoken to other businesses that operate around the world. And you can see this in South Africa's in numbers. If you look at South Africa's fixed investment number, it sits about 15% as a proportion of GDP. And my lessons that I've learned there is that that's not normal. Other countries comparable to South Africa have a fixed investment levels about 25%. And the consequence of that, they see higher GDP growth levels about 4% and a lower unemployment level. And the correct response by the South African government is not to say that you're calculating the tariff, the 30% tariff wrongly, or that of the Minister of Trade and Industry stating that we need more time to come up with a serious deal. You go to Americans and you say, we have about 80% of platinum group metals that we can trade with the United States. Your businesses can set up shop here. We do have empowerment policies. However, we'll incentivize businesses that create jobs through tax credits. We want to open the South African market to other competitors and for South Africa to be competitive, because in the absence of that, choosing the road of poverty, which we are currently in terms of policy, is that South Africa continues to trail behind other emerging markets, and we continue to be an economy that struggles to surpass 1% GDP growth. And that's what I saw there. It's like these are sensible people making sensible decisions, and the concerns from the American side are also very sensible as well in their nature.
Yeah, and certainly one of the other messages, and we've said this many times, we went to the White House to say that not killing just white farmers, we're killing everybody. And, to try and explain to people that that's not normal.
Yes.
It's not normal to be comfortable with bad policing.
Yes.
Policing matters. Safety and security matters. It's not a competition. To see how many people can get murdered in your country. That's not really a great race to win, is it?
No, it's not. And again, my experiences there is that I could walk at 3 a.m. in the morning and nothing will happen to me. That's, for me, I thought that was quite odd. I was actually calling my mother. It's a 9-hour difference between the United States and South Africa. And I was telling her, yeah, I'm just walking from university going back home. And she was shouting at me, why at night? So why are you in trouble? I'm like, there's nothing going on here, bro. And it dawned on me, that's actually what society is supposed to be. There's supposed to be rule of law. A country is supposed to have laws in place as well as the capacity of the state or even that of the private sector to decline the crime rate that South Africa has. South Africa has a murder rate of about 45 murders per 100,000. That's nearly 10 times higher than the United States. And I saw that for myself as well. This is not a normal situation that the country is in, and I do think that it's sensible to move away from those policy directions and towards more sensible direction. And it's quite easy to do, in my opinion.
Yes. So you were there through the election and the subsequent inauguration of President Donald Trump. And he has come in there, like a freight train, making, almost... You couldn't find somebody more different to President Cyril Ramaphosa. Yeah, somebody who does make decisions.
Yes.
Who is approachable, does speak to the media, is in touch with the issues that affect Americans, and he doesn't take 6 months to deliberate on everything and then call for an imbizo. Slightly different management style.
Yeah.
To what we're accustomed to.
It's a vastly different management style. He's definitely much more direct. He's definitely much more harsh. And I think what the South African government should actually look at this is that of opportunity. The way that people put it is that he's a transnational president. The success that he views relations with other nations is the trade agreements that he can reach with particular countries. Let's take, for example, the letters that he sent to a few countries earlier this week, South Africa being one of them. South Africa was made an example of, given the statements made by Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa during his BRICS summit between 6th and 7th of July in Brazil just a few days ago. In that very same summit, there was India. Now, if you compare India and South Africa, you can see a very distinct difference. South Africa went out of its way to firstly name and condemn the United States as well as Israel for its attacks on Iran during the 12-day war. Whereas India, which the same as South Africa has relations with China, has relations with Russia, did not go out of its way to poke the bear in that of the United States, being an economy that has that contributes about 25% to global GDP, while South Africa contributes about 0.6% to global GDP. And the consequence of that from the India perspective is that they enjoy favorable trade agreements with the United States. India secures about $60 billion worth of foreign direct investment towards its borders, while South Africa does not. And that number could take South Africa's fixed investment level from where it currently is to where it needs to be comparable to emerging markets, about 25%. What do these numbers mean exactly? What does a fixed investment number of 25% mean? It means GDP is at about 4%. These are stuff that South Africa actually once achieved between 1994 and 2008. And had we maintained that trajectory of that fixed investment number, your unemployment number currently, which sits at about 32.9%, would actually be about 16%, because about 4.1 million South Africans would have been employed today compared to that of 16.7 million. So we'd have had about 21 million people employed as opposed to 16.7. That has consequences not only for the economic climate of the country in terms of spending, but as well as of that of political support of the ANC. It is why the ANC lost the election last year. And by my numbers, had we maintained that trajectory, which is normal, was what I've seen as well, the ANC wouldn't have lost last year's election where they got 40%. It would actually sit at about 60% and maintained majority in Gauteng as well as that of KwaZulu-Natal. And I think what is actually happening here with the talks between, or the lack or thereof talks between the United States as well as that of South Africa, is actually opportunity on the table from the South African side to actually come up with hard numbers on how to actually do a deal with the United States. And they've clearly laid out the work. If you look at India, if you look at other countries as well that are negotiating in good faith, they were not made an example of earlier this week. And I think that's a signal from the South African perspective that its own laws are actually the tariff on South African domestic investment as well as that of international investment.
But all this happens in the backdrop of us missing a massive opportunity, not just to retain the trade that we have built up with the US over decades, but to actually build it.
Yes.
We could be, a country like South Africa could be selling a lot more stuff to America.
Yes, a lot more stuff. And with a consumer base that's almost twice as big as what it is right now. Another few other number that I worked on as well. If you were to take the size of the economy in South Africa and divide it by its population, which is GDP per capita, that GDP per capita number is about 74,000 rands per person. which is lower than what it was in 2008 at 78,000. So in other words, people that were living in 2008 had a better quality of life than people that live here in South Africa till this day. However, had we maintained a GDP growth rate of about 4%, that number would have been 130,000. That's a difference of nearly 56,000 rands per person. That is a difference of a mother, father, a young South African struggling to get by day to day, as well as that same individual joining the ranks of an upper middle income class economy. And that's actually what the United States is talking to South Africans, is that when I speak to these people, the disappointment that they have is that they see this great potential in South Africa. We have the same quality of level of education that they have, the same quality of healthcare that they have in terms of private education and private healthcare. However, largely due to the fact that we've been an economy that has struggled to surpass 1%, our spending capacity has also been capped. And should be fixed, that we unlock this massive potential in the country. And I think it's definitely within the table in regards to these talks that should happen. I think the government, within the government of national unity, should take this very seriously and table very serious agreements between it and the United States. And we could see that potential being realized.
Yeah, sadly, I think the days of the government of national unity acting in the interests of the country have gone. It's been shown by some of the by some of the decisions that have been made, which have just been crazy, because not only were you in America as they transitioned in power, we also saw South Africa transition in power with the ANC-led government of national unity now passing every law that will impact on South Africa's trade, not just with America, but with the world. They really doubled down on these things, haven't we?
Yeah, no, they definitely have. They've doubled down on expropriation or compensation. They've doubled down on the empowerment policies as well, which act as a tax on investment towards South Africa. And what we've seen as well, if you were to look at the formation of the GNU last year, is that what you saw in South African assets, particularly with the rand, particularly with other assets and the like, is that it was positioned and priced in for reform within the first formation of the government of national unity. We polled within 100 days within the formation of the national unity, and it polled about 58%. And it saw ANC support levels from its May 2024 number at 40% rise to about 46%. However, as going towards 200 days, that we saw a 10 percentage point decline from that number to where it was at 48%. It still remains the most popular deal. If it polls higher, the GNU polls higher than the ANC and polls higher than the DA. So it remains the most popular deal on the table. However, what we've seen, particularly in capital markets and particularly in private industry in South Africa, is that they're simply not pricing in reform given the current formation of a government of national unity, and they're simply pricing it on its fundamentals, such as that of economic growth. My number, which hasn't changed since February, is that I'm seeing that South Africa continues to grow at about 0.8%, and it's largely due to that fixed investment number. And unfortunately, unemployment being above 30% and youth unemployment being above 70%. That's not normal. It's not normal. The people that I work with there in California are like 16, 19 years old and are employed, and their unemployment number is about 9%. When they say they're struggling to find employment, they mean that they're struggling within 2 weeks to find employment, and they don't mean that they're struggling to find employment within more than a year. That is the situation that South Africans are currently faced with. And there's fundamentally no difference between these young individuals there in the United States as well as here in South Africa. South Africa has a huge pool of skills, and there's a huge pool of capital as well. If you look at, for example, our growth rate, the demographics of the young in the country, it's very centered towards the young population, and that's enormous amounts of potential. However, we continue to double on those policies, and the consequence of that, which the ANC is finding itself, and it seems to be failing to actually realize that the approach from the United States is much more different than the approach from the previous administration, which was indulging the ANC, given the fact that it feared pushing it towards Iran, pushing it towards China, as well as that of Russia. But in actually doing that, it has accelerated that pathway. And what Mr. Trump has seen is that actually, if you apply pressure, you can make the South African government fall back on some of its position, and you continue to apply that pressure in order for them to withdraw from some of their foreign policy positions.
Now let's talk about Donald Trump's recent love letters that he sent to countries, right? In the last, couple of days.
Yes.
Where he sent letters to just about every country and including South Africa, announcing tariffs.
Yes.
30% is the tariffs that he's put on South Africa. But this was done in the absence of seemingly any bilateral talks at governmental level. We seem to be purely you're not speaking to them, and antagonizing them at every turn that we get. What do you make of that tactic by the ANC government? Because they've chosen to hold on to that particular part of government, trade policy, international relations. This is all ANC stuff. But yet they won't go to Washington.
The difficult thing, or rather what we've seen, my read of the ANC right now, is that it moves at a very slow pace, a snail's pace at actually addressing significant issues that it's facing, even when those issues are towards its detriment. I said earlier that I started my career about 10 years ago. 10 years ago, the ANC was told that if you do not get your energy availability, which is the proportion of electricity that Eskom generates and sends out to the South African economy, if you don't get that number up where it needs to be, which is above 70%, you're going to be faced with load shedding, scheduled blackouts, and your support levels continue to dwindle. You will lose the metro of Johannesburg as well as other metros. It did not listen. Second point in which it was told is when we started polling about 2 years ago, and when we started polling each and every day until the day before the elections, and we told it that if you actually do not grow the economy, you have a support level of about 40%, and they saw that, they accepted it, they understood, okay, we had 40%, but nothing was really moved from where it needed to be. It's like they allow things to wash over them. And for these things to continue to do so. And the primary example of this, as well as the point that you've raised here with its relation between the US now, is that the US has told it, if you do not negotiate with us in good faith, we will impose tariffs on you. We won't extend the deadline as we have with other countries to the 1st of August. Instead, after the 1st of August, the 30% tariffs will be implemented. But other countries, you don't see that letter of 30% tariffs on their goods because they were negotiating in good faith. They were talking to the Americans. So the African government chooses not to talk to the Americans.
They lecture them.
And they choose to partner with a country that lost this year. It's like they choose to lose. They choose these positions that continue to lose. And it's all fine and well for the government to choose who it wants to associate with in terms of countries, but it needs to be strategic in how it does this. Every decision that it has taken since that, when it lost its majority, even before that, 10 years even before that, has been a losing decision, and it continues to accept that result. It cannot see that if you just simply choose a different path right now, what does that path look like? If you look at, for example, the Cape of Good Hope, the vessels passing by, not docking in the Cape Town ports, are 3 times higher than the Suez Canal. The Americans understand that. The South African government does not understand that quite well. South Africa's endowment of mineral resources are fundamental towards the manufacturing of cars, fundamental to the manufacturing of now AI as well, which is in great demand. The South African government is not seeing that. Instead, it chooses to double down on these very losing positions. It's like watching a sports team that continues to score. Instead of running towards the other side of the field, it runs back to its side of the field and scores against its own keeper.
Yes.
And that keeper is South Africans. It's private industry that continue to try to block these own goals and try to operate in this environment. And those are the successes of this country.
What do you say to the school of thought that if we, that in order for South Africa to thrive, we must have local ownership of mineral production, local ownership of everything. Otherwise, we're going to get cut out of our own economy.
That's been, if you look at government policy, that has been the narrative over the past, since that of 2008. And the consequence of that is an economy that has struggled to surpass 1% GDP growth. What you need is to increase your investment number. That is actually what you need. And it must come from a domestic as well as from an international perspective. These are companies that really do want to invest in the country because they see its geographic location. They see the capital involved. The unfortunate thing, there's quite a large, well, depending on how you look at it, there's a lot of South Africans that actually live in California. And what I found is that they get educated here, but they work very nice jobs in the United States, because the United States does not have these mad policies of localization. They allow people to operate the way that they want. They don't have mad laws in terms of the government telling them who to hire or where to operate or what percentage of localization should they be. As a result of that, they've attracted quite this large pool of skills within the borders of the United States, and should be continue with that localization policy narrative, which is much more towards the centralization. And a case in point right now, just a silly example, is the city of Johannesburg that wants to nationalize and centralize CCTV cameras in the city of Johannesburg. This is not the way to do things in the country. Those cameras are there because of the crime, and they're there because of the private households that have implemented them, and have implemented their own private lighting, because the street lights, some of them are not working. That is how you encourage growth. Simply get out of the way of the private South African. These are people capable of going about and starting up shop and operating in the country. This is that continue, from a government perspective, getting in the way of those people, and the consequence of that is the economy that struggles to grow.
Yeah. Now, what do you say to people? I'm sure if you had to go back home, which I know you recently did, down in the Eastern Cape, that's a hotbed of ANC support. To people that you would have grown up with, people family members, I'm sure, that would say exactly the opposite, saying China's the future, Russia's the future, America's the past. We should be doing what they do. Look how well China's doing with a centralized economy, where the government decides what you should be wearing, where you should be working.
I actually think it's the opposite there, Mike. Actually, we've done polling on this question as well, asking South Africans, if you were to educate your child or to have your family in a country between the United States and China, where would you send your kids and where would you raise your family? Majority of South Africans choose the United States. Even that in the Eastern Cape, they see the United States as this prospering nation that they want to live, and they see having an income there. And it's the aspirations of these individuals. Speaking there at home, particularly in the Eastern Cape, this is much more of your elderly population. My grandmother, which has unfortunately passed away in 2018, as well as that of her sisters as well. This is your older generation that remembers a very successful nation. And I think that's where a lot of that loyalty lies, is that their lives compared to how they were living before 1994 generally did improve. However, if you look at the young that have left rural parts of the country, come to Johannesburg, much of them are faced with a harsh reality. And they still, when I speak to them and we look at the polling as well, they still choose to align with the United States rather than that of China. Not to say there's anything wrong with China trading with South Africa. I don't particularly see anything wrong with, for example, Russia wanting to improve South Africa's electricity generation, as an example. There's nothing wrong with that. I think it's very sensible as well. And I think it would be beneficial towards South Africa if we can get the refitment of our coal stations up. South Africa has enough defunct coal stations just on the energy alone to remove the cap on GDP growth from where it is at 1% to where it can be at about 2 to 3%. And if we fix our empowerment policy, we fix our expropriation or our compensation, putting back market value to the Expropriation Act. If the government is saying publicly that they're willing to do so, as they've indicated in some sense that they would be willing to move in that direction, then make it explicit in that act itself. Every other country has an expropriation clause. However, if you go in those countries, you are compensated for the property that your government has taken away from you. But here in South Africa, picture this as a household, as a mother owning a house in the East Rand. And you've bought that house for about 2 million Rand. It is appreciated to about 3.5 million Rand. The government expropriates your property for about 1 million Rand. The difference of that is expropriation or compensation. It is a weakening of South Africa's property rights in the country. And fundamentally, because of that, South Africa continues to fall behind other countries that have sensible policies.
Yeah. So now, once again, America has got a very, very different sort of doctrine to almost any country in the world. And that's why 300 million people, and it's got what's it, 25% of global GDP.
Yeah, 25%, 26% of global GDP, thereabouts. It's the biggest economy in the world. And it's quite interesting that our government is telling that economy, like, this is how you should do things. Or it's like disputing, like I've been asked this morning, am I ever frustrated with how the government approaches these matters? And to a certain degree, yes, because normal South Africans, if you ask a South African, how would you go about operating a business? They choose very sensible things and they make the same decisions that a private business would do, even there in the States. It's just that the government, from a policy perspective, gets in the way of those individuals.
Yeah.
And that economy, like the United States, chooses not to do so in some aspects. They have federalism. Some states have different laws. Some states have sensible laws. Some don't have sensible laws, and they compete amongst each other. For example, I've seen and I've done some research looking at California versus Texas. And you're seeing a lot of investment in terms of manufacturing in Texas, the likes of that of Tesla, for example, just to draw an example, and Elon Musk as well, moving shop from California, going towards Texas. And it's largely drawing that capital. And these states can compete amongst each other. And I think that's what the country also needs. Largely, it can also be done from a government of national unity perspective. We did see some resemblance of this in February, when the ANC side of camp wanted to hike the VAT hike by about 2%. And the DA was fighting against it. You saw that tension of the battling between policy in the country. And I think that's what needed to be done, is that there should be a tabling of actually good policies, be it that of a domestic, be it that of a foreign perspective. Hard, concrete numbers, and nothing of the layers which the United States sees that the South African government particularly is not taking seriously. And in the absence of that, unfortunately, we are faced with this environment that we're currently in.
Tell us a little bit about the social situation within the US. You know, it is a place. We saw the big anti-Israel protests, followed by a clampdown, followed by immigrations and some hardcore action on illegal immigrants, in some cases them getting it wrong. Is it, you know, in California recently there was a sort of a, call it a, I don't know, what would one call it, a riot.
Yeah.
But if there was a riot, you know,
Yeah.
I didn't see anybody singing or dancing, so it can't be a riot. South Africa, we've got our own unique riots. I've never understood why when you're angry you'd want to sing and dance, but hey, that's just me.
Yeah.
But, yeah, you sit there and obviously you're there. People would immediately assume you're black, you're American, there's, you know. Have you felt particularly discriminated against in the US?
That's actually a very good question. I've actually sometimes even forgotten what my race is there, because people were treating me as a normal person. It's the same case here even in South Africa. But, you know, when you watch American TV, you listen to the news, you have this assumption that people view people according to their race. Mm-hmm. But when I was there, I stay particularly with this very wonderful family. It's a white family, but they treat me as one of their sons. I go to a shopping grocery outlet and people treat me as a normal individual. So they're really sensible people. And speaking about these riots as well, where I am currently, when the LA fires were happening earlier this year, they were happening above me. And when the LA riots were happening, they were happening below me. It's like,
so you're the problem.
I'm the problem.
Match in one hand, petrol bomb in the other.
And in terms of the social issues, it depends who you ask. If you go towards academia, that's where you see the protests. But if you just simply walk a kilometer away from university campuses as well as big cities, you just see normal people going about their ordinary lives. You don't see those protests that you would see in university campuses, for example. And I think that's also something to be said about that. Is like, when you go to a grocery outlet, I'm not seeing people protest. I'm not seeing people go out their way to make a political statement. They just have a job and they work a normal 9 to 5 and they have a family to feed. And their lives are good from my perspective.
Yeah, and having a good life's not a bad thing. In South Africa, we try and demonize having a good life, I suppose, because that is our history, where the optics were, not just the optics, the reality was that whites in South Africa did have a good life, and black South Africans had a hard life in apartheid, you know, by comparison. And I suppose what's happened is over the years we've developed this idea that good equals bad. If you
Yeah.
so but whereas in the US, everybody strives to have a good life, not to bring people down that are having a good
Yes.
life, to say no,
Yes.
your life shouldn't be this good.
Yes. Everyone, most encouraging thing as well is like people there are very friendly and they would like to see you succeed.
Yes.
The amount of resources, the amount of capital that I was able to pull there was absolutely amazing because they were interested in my personal success, which I found absolutely amazing. They saw me come in as someone from outside and they're wondering, who is this guy? And the first thing I told them, like, yeah, so like I remember I was attending a church there and I said it publicly as well. It was like a round circle of young men just reading the scripture. And I told them, yeah, I had my first time having a burrito and described it. It had French fries, it had avocado. And then the guy tapped me. He's like, that's not a real burrito. Let me show you where a real burrito is. And he took me around, and he became a very close friend of mine. He's like, he showed me around. And I wondered, like, you didn't need to do that. Like, you didn't need to take me out and actually for me to experience your culture as well. And I found that quite remarkable. Those are Americans. They're really interested in the success of other people, and they're quite friendly people to be around.
Yeah, it would be nice if we lowered the fists now and again in South Africa.
Yes.
It always feels to me that you're always quite close to a confrontational thing. And I've had many people sit in this chair that you're sitting in, telling us, talking about the imminent collapse of the US, saying the US is the past. Do you think that is done more out of jealousy, out of sort of some Cold War hope that the past would be rewritten, with America's big failure? I mean,
I think it comes from either one or two camps: a lack of actually going to the United States and seeing it for themselves openly, and not defaulting towards certain ideological lenses or leanings, and actually looking on their numbers. They have an unemployment rate of about 4.2%, youth unemployment rate that's up 10%, a thriving economy as well. Sure, what's going on now with the tariffs is sort of weakened the economic GDP numbers, but still, if you look at it, unemployment's still solid. It's a thriving economy with lots of spending happening. Restaurants as well, if you look at Orange County, California, opening up every other block. And people filling those restaurants from Thursday to Sunday, even during the week. I don't see that as a failure of a nation. That's a very successful nation to me.
Yeah, I mean, I must admit, I keep on hearing our politicians say it's business that doesn't want the economy to grow. And I've never understood the logic, what's going on in your mind when you say that, because every businessman or woman wants the economy to grow because you're going to end up with more clients.
It's your customers.
It's your customers. But yet there's certainly a school of thought of people within government, outside analysts, as if business is loving this bad economy because it's somehow, I don't know, they don't want to share. Please, God, I've never met the businessman that didn't want to do more business. So I don't understand the logic. Do you have a better grasp on why South Africans believe that business people in South Africa don't want growth?
Well, we've also asked, under the Social Research Foundation, of which Gabriel has also spoken on these numbers and written about and published them, we've actually asked South Africans, do you trust the private sector or the government to manage the South African economy? What's interesting with that question is that a lot of South Africans say that we trust the government to manage the economy. However, if we then ask them, if you run a business, would you trust the government to state who you should employ in your business, where you should operate, and what proportion of your board should be set on some random quota? And a lot of them vastly disagreed. And what we saw there is that there was a fundamental difference between the theory as well as the practical way in which South Africans were going about their lives. They can say these things, and I think this is what's quite difficult for politicians to also get a read of, is that when they go to these stadiums and see 90,000 people packed there in that stadium, they get one sense of the issue. But if you take those people and you take them here to Sandton, you take them there to Melrose, give them a job that pays them, and they can buy a car, and move them from the environment that they're currently in, which is a very dire situation to be in. It's not normal. which is what I've recently learned. And you find that those South Africans actually want sensible things. They govern the same way as private individuals in this country want. They want quality education, they want private healthcare, and they want to have an income for themselves as well as that of their family. That is what I found quite interesting, is that if you just put yourself, which is I think what many South Africans go about day to day, they're very practical in the way of how they approach these issues. And for these politicians, I think that's what they need to get a read of. Instead of getting the read from what you're seeing in the packfulness of stadiums, that just means that you're very good at packing a stadium. But actually look at how people are choosing to govern themselves. Yeah. Look at the frustrations that was happening just mere 2 weeks ago in Soweto, where there was no power for about 2 weeks. Protests happening in the biggest township in the country. And those were people that are telling the ANC that we're frustrated. And that's 30% of public protests that are violent. That's a number that should be telling you something. The very first time that a call was made that the ANC would lose its majority was in 2012. And it was done off the basis of simply looking at the level of protest action in the country measured against the economic performance of this country. And what it saw was an ANC losing its support levels. And its fundamental support is anchored by that, by the material circumstances of South Africans. Should those improve between 1994 and 2008, it rises to support. Should they decline, it weakens.
Now, Bheki, if that's the case, and, I've done that research, we've spoken about, I've seen that research, read it, and discussed it many, many times. Why do you suppose then the political support that has left the ANC, right, hasn't gone to parties that would improve the economy? In fact, it's gone to parties that would make the economy considerably worse. When you look at Mkhonto we sees where EFF, etc.
Yes.
Those, if we think that the ANC is bad, those parties from an economic perspective would be diabolical for the country.
Yeah.
Why do you suppose, if you say that people that in the stadium are there because of the occasion, let's call it that,
the esteem,
but they live their lives differently or want different things, why then do they vote? Why is our voting moving more to the left rather than to the right, where they, their needs and desires would be given expression to?
If you watch a boxing match and say you're watching Mike Tyson versus some other person, are you cheering for the person that's winning or are you cheering for the person that's losing? And I think that's the thing that most South Africans are looking at, is that when they actually look at the boxing match, the arena of political parties, then they're trying to look for other opponents to enter the ring. They see that other opponents are not capable to have the punching bags necessary for them to vote for that party. And that's unfortunate, because when you look at these things, we read these documents, we read the documents of other political parties, and we can see what this actually means. But for the South African, they're very smart and astute. Don't get that wrong. They understand what's going on. But for them, they look at who is currently winning that fighting battle. If you're looking at the MK, for example, Jacob Zuma's brand was very popular in KZN and still remains the case, which is the reason why they're now polling at 18%. And it's largely because he managed to box the ANC into a winning position. And that's why people voted for them. The branding was there. But in terms of the policies, which is what you're getting to, the policies would not amount to South Africa to reach those levels that we earlier talked about. And if you look at it as well, for those individuals, should they be a capable party that manages to get its branding right in terms of recognition, in terms of its favorability as well, which is quite important. It's important, which is to your point as well, which I think you're absolutely right. It's important from the policy perspective that you get it right, but it's also important from the capital and the familiarity of South Africans, that they do know you and that you take very strategic positions in order to win the battles. An example as well that my colleague France has made is, if you look at opposition parties as well within the DA, not to bash all political parties, this is really the caliber of leadership in South Africa is very weak, including that of the leadership of the DA. It's fundamentally weak on its messaging on expropriation or compensation. It's fundamentally weak on how to actually address the issues of the country. And as a South African watching this boxing match, I'm like, this team is losing.
Sticking with the boxing comparison, do you think South Africa needs a trip to the canvas to know that it actually hurts when you get hit? You make these bad choices, this is how you're going to live your life. In other words, do you think it would be doing South Africa a service if there was suddenly a coalition tomorrow between the ANC and MK and the country goes to hell? That might be the thing, that finally cures the madness.
I actually think that there's a great risk that it actually exacerbate things from my read of things and from my perspective, in that sense that if you massively weaken the middle income class in the country and they leave, you leave an environment where you can ferment radicalism, where to the point where the country sees hyperinflation, and to the point where the people that can retaliate against that force of nature would not be there. They would have left elsewhere. I actually think that's the path that the country could avoid, and that's still within the options to avoid that path. But I don't think you need to. I agree with the statement in terms of you should allow people to understand where they're taking this and to face the consequences of their voting patterns. At the same time, though, when you look at South Africa and you look at the voting patterns as well, you see these very high unemployment numbers, and to that point as well, I'm not seeing normal people that are saying, I'm going to violently take over the government because this government has failed me. They still trust, even though it has weakened to some degree, on the democratic process of South Africa. And it's largely because of the caliber of leadership and the caliber of policy and the caliber of political capital. It's not there at present. When I was in the United States and I was watching the conversation between Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa and Mr. Trump, my family called with utter disappointment because they saw someone lose their boxing match, and they saw Trump winning that boxing match. Not what you read in the media. Speak to normal South Africans who were vastly disappointed with what they saw there, because they saw someone actually lose, someone who had the capacity to actually speak on concrete numbers to lift South Africa's economic potential. And I think if a lot of people start to think within this nature, this is why we're doing polling, this is why we're also providing these numbers, so that these people, from a government perspective, from a private as well, from a private individual perspective and private sector, should actually see that that's a path that we should not go in order to actually understand the lesson. Because if we get there, it might be already too late to reverse the trajectory.
Yeah, well, when Zimbabwe chose the wrong road, Zimbabweans could come to South Africa. The more I look to the south of South Africa, the more I just see ocean, and we probably can't go to the Antarctic. There's nowhere else to go. This place works, or we actually start going completely off this continent. So South Africans should make some wise choices, and perhaps the first place to start is to listen to Bheki Mahlobo. Bheki, thank you so much. It's so good to see you again.
Good to see you.
To everybody that's watched this, I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I've enjoyed listening to Bheki. Please support Pace Car Rental. And like and subscribe the State of the Nation channel. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Bheki.
Thank you.
Every business needs a world-class video to show to your clients and prospective clients. When the Stream-In team isn't filming the State of the Nation, they are producing those world-class videos for companies just like yours. They have got all of the equipment, drones, microphones, whatever you need, and the technical know-how to film a proper video for your company. Visit their website.